It is time to close on this beautiful home, 401 Edgewood Trail. It is in Newport. It is an awesome Newport location. It is a corporate relocation. So we're going to dive in and talk about it. All right, so I had to come back to the office because the final walkthrough was going on while I was doing it there, so we couldn't be making videos during the final walkthrough. But anyways, okay, 401 Edgewood Trail, super cool house. This is a little bit different because it was a corporate relocation sale, which I'm going to talk about. And then also it has some kind of it was a not great situation in the sense that the my sellers, had bought it in December of 2025 and were selling it in May of 2026. When I first met with them, it was April. Not ideal. So the East Tennessee real estate market is great, but it ain't that great. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you're going to turn a big profit if you go to buy in December and want to sell in the following April. Not ideal. So we kind of knew that was a hurdle to begin with. Whenever I first met with them, we talked about that, and essentially it was a relocation. They had no intention of moving, but then they had this opportunity to go back to where they are originally from. And the job opportunity was really great, so they couldn't not take the opportunity. So that's kind of it happens when people are like, why do people sell so soon? Or why would they do this? Or whatever. Life happens. We are complicated as people, right? So we don't just assume like there's something wrong with the house. Oh my God. Ugh. People are always asking, what's wrong with the house? Maybe there's nothing wrong with the house. Maybe there's literally nothing. And that was the case here. So that's kind of the backstory. Having said that, through their relocation, their company offered corporate relocation services. So that is a major benefit to the seller because they do there's all kinds of perks. Financially, there's perks in the sense of like they will cover if there's like any kind of loss up to a certain amount. They will cover the cost for moving. They might provide for you a place to stay. They will essentially buy the house from you if it doesn't sell. And they basically remove you as the seller from the paperwork side of things. Yes, you do still negotiate. You do still decide who your agent's going to be, but you have a little bit more reassurance in the sense of if this doesn't sell, I'm not completely screwed. I can't not take this job, blah, blah, blah. So, that's kind of the idea. As a real estate agent, corporate relocations, whether you're the listing agent or you're the buying agent, they can be extremely complicated from a paperwork standpoint. Very complicated. And I'm not saying you would necessarily want an agent that's done this before, but you kind of want someone that's done it before in the sense of, or that someone that's just highly competent. Maybe it is their first time. I had my first relo several years ago. And yeah, we figured it out. It was successful, but it is a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of timelines. And some of that paperwork is especially scary, especially for the buyer, because it's essentially the relocation company kind of comes off as I don't need you, you need me, even though you're the buyer trying to buy the house. And so sometimes some of the language on some of their addendums, it can be quite scary, or it just can be quite aggressive. They tend to dictate, who the title company is going to be, et cetera, but it's all because the corporate company manages and takes care of all of the paperwork side of things. So anyways, how I got involved in corporate relo is because EXP, my brokerage, they have a relocation certification. I have that credential, and so therefore if something comes along, then I get an opportunity to interview with the seller for the opportunity to be the listing agent. So anyhow, and it's important to note here, I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but essentially the relocation company gets a portion of commission on the list side. So that's kind of where the money's coming from, I think, on their end of how they do things. I don't really know, but Anyways, that being said, I don't like turning down a listing. You know what I mean? I don't like to turn it down. I don't like to turn down business in general. You know what I mean? So anyhow, that being said, 401 Edgewood, we essentially in this situation, in many situations as a listing agent, usually a seller is interviewing more than one agent. In this case, for different corporate relocation, they require a certain amount of interviews. So here, the company wanted 2 agents to be interviewed because they wanted 2, what we call a BMA, which is a broker marketing analysis. And that is basically a comp analysis for what should the home be, what's the environment like, how competitive is the market where this home is, and you do like the immediate market and you do the more macro market. So anyhow, that being said, you do all that before you even know if you're going to get the listing, and then you send that report. The seller decides which agent they're going to go with, and then from there is when we start the marketing process. So that kind of all happened before knowing whether or not I was going to be listing this property. So that's kind of the behind the scenes when it comes to a corporate relo, is there's a lot of footwork that goes on before you even get the listing paperwork done, because corporate relo has to confirm and okay everything, and then the sellers also, of course, have to okay who their agent is. Now, the sellers kind of, in a way, I don't know if this is the right way to say this, I am not a real estate attorney, lawyer, I'm not a corporate relocation employee, but essentially, the sellers kind of sign away their rights to the house. It kind of becomes the corporate relocation company's house to sell, in the sense that, like, the sellers complete a property disclosure form, but that then gets marked out. It gets provided to the buyer, but then also the relocation company says, hey, these are not our disclosures. We've not lived in the house. Obviously, it's a corporate company. So there's just a bunch of just different paperwork pieces to know. So long story short, for my interview for this listing, I, of course, was concerned about the timeline. We talked about that. And what I was relieved to find out when I went to the house is that they had done some cosmetic things that made the home look different than when they had bought it in December. Because what you want to avoid is, like, let's like this house look exactly the same, which it didn't picture very well in general in the old listing. The paint wasn't great, etc. So anyhow, that being said, when I walked into the house and I saw, like, oh, there's an accent wall and they've painted this and they did this, that was a super positive thing. So that certainly worked to the benefit of this home sale, and is something you consider also on the pricing, because of course it's not like the market has exploded between December to May when they're going to be listing this thing. But we also wanted to avoid a bunch of money lost. So having said that, some other things that this house had going for it: location. It's very close to the interstate. It's close to a Lowe's, a Marshall's, blah, blah. It's very close to a bunch of stuff, when in general this area is considered very rural and kind of far. But where it is located is super convenient. But you had mountain views out of your entire back deck, and there's even a balcony for the master bedroom with mountain views. Beautiful. And the yard is great. Plus that it has a beautiful, amazing, attached, oversized 2-car garage, complete with a workshop space plumbed in for another bathroom. I mean, it has like all these good things. The con, of course, is the timeline. And that's really the major con to me of this house, is like, ideally, again, you're not wanting to buy in December and sell in May. So that being said, I interviewed, I got the job to list their home. From there, we got pictures and video, completed professional photo, professional video, as I do with all my listings. And then we put that baby up on the market, and had some really nice showing activity. And one of those buyers that came put in an offer. We actually got more than one offer, but in the corporate relocation process, you have to put, in a typical situation, you put like a 24-hour expiration on an offer. In a corporate relo situation, they will dictate that. They want a certain expiration period on that offer, because it's going through corporate. They have to look at it all, blah, blah, blah. However, you do not send that offer to corporate until the sellers want to accept that offer. The sellers don't sign off on that offer It goes to the corporate people once the sellers have said, yes, we would like to accept this offer. So in the midst of all that, that can take a while. We had gotten another offer. We had some other interest. We actually, we had a third offer. That was like a much lower offer, which of course the sellers were like, we're not taking that. But the first two, the one that the sellers took, and then another one, it was a little bit lower. Those happen. And then in the midst of corporate trying to accept one, we had another offer, but what we had in hand was better anyways. And the sellers had said, like, that's what we're going with because a lot of the terms were great. They were taking it as is. The price was at ask. So a lot of positives when it came to the offer that we got. So anyhow, from there, because it was an as is sell and the buyers weren't asking for repairs. They weren't going to do any of that stuff. It was pretty seamless. And also we could do a pretty quick timeline in terms of from contract to close. I think we got under contract to be, beginning of May, and we were closing by May 29th. So very quick turnaround, and a huge success for the sellers because again, the hurdle was worrying about, okay, well, are we going to lose a bunch of money? So as I mentioned before, when we went to list it, a positive of this was two things. When I met with her, she asked if we needed to stage the home. They were having movers come, and I said, well, because the rooms are so big, like the proportions are so huge, it was a benefit to have furniture, at least in the pictures. Not like we don't have to have furniture there when buyers come, but it is a benefit, of course, when the furniture is nice and it looks good, that you would have furniture in the home. However, she was like, do we need to have staging? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you don't need to have staging. Like basically you just need to declutter a little bit because that is a form of staging, right? It needs to be completely clean because the furniture was fine. There was nothing with the furniture. There was a couple bedspreads I told her that needed to be fixed or changed out and just some little little ticky-tack things that would make it show better and to make it look better in pictures. But because the photos were going to look different already because of the cosmetic changes they had made, that, to me, staging wasn't really necessary. Because it was already, the furniture she has is fine, and then the changes that they made were enough to make it stand out. So having said that, we didn't stage it. We did change out a couple things. And then when it came to pricing, essentially what we found is that there was this window of pricing. And I think it was like $350 to like nothing up to like $378, like within like a competing price range for square footage, size, like type of home, type of buyer in this area. So, we talked about, they wanted to be more than $350 because they wanted a window in case that they needed to negotiate and in case somebody submitted an offer lower than asking price. So we looked at, okay, where's the gaps in pricing? And there was this gap that made sense to be $369, maybe a $370, but also that gets perceived as like they just bought this, that they really put that like $20,000 of work into it, etc. So we needed something that was like, this is going to give us some room if we need to go negotiate, but not going to be perceived as like a money grab because people don't like a money grab, even though this is real estate, and if you're trying to sell your home, you're trying to make the most money as possible. That makes sense. You're not a bad person. That's just how it is. Okay. So that being said, it made sense to be at $365. She was a little bit worried about the appraisal, but because like previously when they bought it, it had been listed up to $380. So, there was some sort of justification for that price, but more so than that, the comps that we used when we looked at pricing it, when I've completed that broker market analysis, supported a $365 price and, didn't make it seem like, oh my gosh, there's no way this is going to appraise. So long story short, we got an offer at ask, as is the closing they needed. So boom, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. This was actually for a corporate relocation, extremely smooth. We just made sure that we marketed it well. We got people in there easily. They could easily show it because the sellers were not there, so they could easily go in, check it out, look at it. And we, it it was pretty wham bam, thank you ma'am, other than the paperwork. So that to me is the only thing. And like on my end as the agent, I think that as on the buy side and the sell side, whether I'm listing the property or I'm representing a buyer on a corporate relocation, the paperwork can be a lot. And so I'm saying that because as an agent, it impacts me. As your buyer's agent, it's going to impact them. And on the buy side, there's going to be additional documents that you're going to sign, but you wouldn't really know what you were going to sign anyways, probably, unless you've bought a bunch of different houses. These forms aren't going to be anything crazy. On the sell side, it might be a little bit frustrating because you're going to be signing multiple disclosures. So for example, when I sent all the listing paperwork to these specific sellers, they're like, we already signed a bunch of these documents, but actually they had signed all of the corporate relocation documents, but then you also sign a set for me as your listing agent with my brokerage. And so it's just paperwork heavy. And I'm not saying that's not a reason to not use corporate relocation company by any sense. I'm just saying that's what makes it different than if it was just a no corporate entity was involved. So anyways, congratulations to everybody involved. And that's some behind the scenes of the sale of 401 Edgewood Trail. I think that's everything.